Something happened recently that your soulmate was never supposed to discover. A conversation, a message, a detail that did not fit the story they had been told about you. And the moment they noticed it, everything started falling apart. Because for a long time, your soulmate thought their opinion of you was completely their own. They thought they had chosen the distance. They thought they had reached their own conclusions. They thought they knew why they pulled away, why they doubted you, why they suddenly started seeing you differently. But now they are realizing something that has left them completely shaken. Someone was influencing the way they saw you behind the scenes. Someone was quietly placing thoughts in their mind and calling it concern. Someone was telling them things about you while pretending they were only trying to protect them. And the shocking part is this: your soulmate is beginning to remember everything. The warnings, the strange comments, the moment someone suddenly brought your name into a conversation for no reason. The way one person always seemed to have an explanation for your behavior before your soulmate even asked you directly. At first, they ignored it. Then they noticed the pattern. And once they noticed the pattern, they could not unsee it. Imagine someone painting a portrait of you while secretly changing the picture every time your soulmate looked away. They were not seeing the real you. They were seeing the version someone else wanted them to see. But now the paint is beginning to crack. The story is beginning to collapse. And your soulmate has just started asking the one question that could expose everything. Why were you so determined to keep me away from them? Because the truth they are about to uncover is far deeper than simple jealousy. Someone had a reason to make sure your soulmate never saw you clearly. The person behind this was not necessarily the loudest person in the room. In fact, that is what makes this so disturbing. The person who secretly influenced your soulmate may have appeared calm, caring, reasonable, even protective. They did not need to openly attack you. They did not need to say, "Stay away from them." They understood something far more powerful. If you want to control someone's opinion, you do not always give them a conclusion. Sometimes you simply give them a question and let their own mind do the damage. Are you sure you trust them? I don't know. Something about them feels different. I'm only telling you this because I care about you. Those words may have sounded harmless at the time, but slowly, quietly, they began creating a picture of you that was never based on the complete truth. And your soulmate may now be realizing that the person they trusted was not simply sharing information. They were directing the story. One comment here, one carefully timed warning there, one exaggerated version of something that actually happened. One detail removed, another detail added. And before your soulmate even realized it, they were looking at you through someone else's eyes. That is how manipulation works. It rarely arrives wearing a villain's face. It often arrives wearing the face of concern. Imagine someone standing behind a curtain, quietly moving the strings while convincing everyone on the stage that the puppet is moving by itself. Your soulmate thought every doubt belonged to them. They thought every suspicion came from their own intuition. They thought they were making independent decisions. But now they are beginning to see the strings, and the person holding them is starting to panic. Because the moment your soulmate began asking direct questions, the entire story started becoming unstable. Why did you always seem to know something negative about me? Why did you always warn me before I had even told you what happened? Why did every story somehow make them look innocent and make the chosen one look guilty? Why did you always have a reason for why I should not trust them? These are the questions that destroy a carefully constructed illusion. The manipulator may have believed that your soulmate would never compare the stories with reality. They believed they could control the narrative forever. But they made one mistake. They forgot that your soulmate had their own experiences with you. They forgot about the moments when you were kind without asking for anything. They forgot about the times you stayed when leaving would have been easier. They forgot that reality eventually creates evidence that lies cannot erase. And now your soulmate is going back through the past with a completely different understanding. The conversation they once thought was normal suddenly feels suspicious. The warning they once believed suddenly sounds calculated. The person they once trusted now seems to have known far too much about your relationship. And this is where the emotional shift begins. Your soulmate may not immediately confront anyone. They may become quiet first. They may start watching. They may listen more carefully. They may ask questions they never asked before. Because once someone realizes they have been influenced, they do not suddenly trust every explanation they receive. They start examining everything. The most dangerous manipulation does not sound like hatred. It sounds like concern from someone you already trust, and that is exactly why this person was so effective. They knew your soulmate would never expect the danger to come from them. They may have positioned themselves as the protector, the advisor, the person who understood everything. But behind the scenes, there may have been jealousy, insecurity, control, resentment, or even a fear that your soulmate would choose you over them. Maybe they were afraid of losing their influence. Maybe they could see something between you and your soulmate that they could never create for themselves. Maybe your connection threatened a position they had carefully built. Whatever the reason, the goal was the same. Keep your soulmate confused about you. But confusion only works when nobody stops to compare the pieces. And now your soulmate is comparing everything. The words they heard against the things they personally experienced. The warnings against the reality. The story against the evidence. And the more they compare, the more uncomfortable the truth becomes. Because they are beginning to understand that someone did not simply misunderstand you. Someone may have been actively shaping the way they misunderstood you. And the person who controlled the story never expected your soulmate to look behind the curtain. But now they have. And what they are about to discover next is even more painful, because they are beginning to realize that this manipulation did not just change their opinion of you. It may have stolen moments, conversations, and opportunities that the two of you were supposed to have together. And this is the part your soulmate is struggling with the most, because discovering that someone influenced their opinion is one thing. Realizing that they actually believed it, acted on it, and allowed it to change the way they treated you is something completely different. At first, they may try to deny it. They may tell themselves that they still had their own reasons. They may say, "I was only being careful." They may convince themselves that the distance between you happened naturally. But the more they replay the past, the harder that explanation becomes to believe. Because now they are remembering the exact moments when their feelings suddenly changed. They remember conversations with that person before they became distant from you. They remember questions they never used to ask. They remember doubts that seemed to appear out of nowhere. They remember the way they started looking at your actions differently after someone else had already explained those actions to them. And slowly, a painful realization begins to form. Maybe those thoughts were never completely theirs. Maybe someone planted the doubt first and then waited for your soulmate to water it. The truth hurts differently when you realize the distance between two people was built by a third. Imagine standing in a room filled with photographs of your entire connection, only to discover that someone has been cutting pieces out of every picture. Your soulmate thought they were looking at the complete story, but they were only seeing the fragments someone wanted them to see. The moments you were patient were ignored. The moments you were hurt were presented as evidence against you. The times you tried to explain yourself were called excuses. The times you stayed silent were called proof that you did not care. Every part of you was being translated into the worst possible meaning. And now your soulmate is looking back and asking a question that may be difficult to answer. Did I really see them clearly? Or did I only see the version someone else created for me? That question can change everything. Because once a person starts questioning the source of their beliefs, they begin questioning the beliefs themselves. Your soulmate may now be remembering moments when you tried to reach them and they pushed you away without fully knowing why. They may remember times you seemed confused by their behavior. They may remember the pain in your face when they accused you of things you never understood. And perhaps now, for the first time, they are realizing that you may have been reacting to a situation you never even knew existed. You felt the change, but you could not see the cause. You felt the distance, but you could not understand who was creating it. You noticed that something was different, but every time you tried to make sense of it, the truth remained just outside your reach. That is what makes manipulation so damaging. The person being manipulated often feels the consequences without ever seeing the source. Your soulmate may have thought they were protecting themselves from you, while unknowingly protecting the person who was creating the misunderstanding. And now the guilt may be beginning to appear, not because they suddenly became weak, but because they are realizing how many moments were lost, how many conversations never happened, how many times they could have asked you directly, but trusted someone else's version instead. How do you apologize for a distance you did not realize someone else created? That may be the question sitting heavily inside them now. And this is why they may not immediately rush toward you. Do not mistake silence for indifference. Sometimes a person becomes quiet because they are trying to understand the damage they helped create. They may be replaying everything. They may be wondering whether you knew. They may be asking themselves if you ever realized someone was standing between you. And the hardest question of all may be this: if I had known the truth sooner, would everything between us have been different? The answer may never be simple, because discovering the truth does not erase the past. It does not instantly remove the pain. It does not magically return the time that was lost. But it does something important. It gives your soulmate a completely different understanding of what happened. The person they once blamed may no longer look like the villain. The person they once trusted may no longer look innocent. And now, as the pieces continue falling into place, your soulmate is beginning to realize something they were never prepared to face. The story they believed about you was never the whole story. And the moment they finally understood that, they stopped asking who was right and started asking whether they had lost something real because they trusted the wrong voice. And now your soulmate is being forced to face the version of you that existed outside the story they were given. This is where everything begins to change, because the person they were warned about does not match the person they actually experienced. They were told you were difficult, but now they are remembering how many times you stayed patient when you had every reason to walk away. They were told you were cold, but now they are remembering the moments you cared without making a performance out of it. They were told you were selfish, but now they are remembering how often you gave more than you ever received. They were told you could not be trusted, but now they are asking themselves why your actions never fully matched the accusations. And this is the part that becomes impossible for them to ignore. The story about you was built from selected moments, carefully chosen interpretations, and information that was never complete. Imagine looking at the moon through a dirty window and believing the moon itself is dark. Then one day the glass is cleaned and suddenly you realize the darkness was never coming from the moon. It was coming from what stood between you and the truth. Your soulmate may now be experiencing that exact realization. You did not suddenly become a different person. You did not magically transform into someone worthy of understanding. They are simply beginning to see what was always there. The patience, the depth, the loyalty, the pain you never explained. The things you endured quietly because you knew that forcing someone to believe you would never create real understanding. And maybe this is why your silence affected them more than they ever admitted. You may have sensed that something was wrong, but you could not prove it. You may have felt them pulling away after certain conversations. You may have noticed the change in their energy, the sudden suspicion, the questions that did not sound like them. But what could you do when you did not know who was influencing the situation? You could not fight a story you had never been allowed to hear. You could not defend yourself against accusations that were being created behind closed doors. So perhaps you stepped back. Perhaps you stopped explaining. Perhaps you let the silence grow because you realized that constantly proving your innocence to someone who had already decided to misunderstand you was slowly destroying your peace. And now your soulmate may be realizing that your silence was never proof that you did not care. Maybe it was the result of being exhausted from trying to reach someone who was listening to another voice more than they were listening to you. You can control someone's opinion for a while, but you cannot control every experience they have with the person you told them to fear. That is where the manipulator made their greatest mistake. They could control what your soulmate heard, but they could not control every moment your soulmate shared with you. They could not erase every memory. They could not remove every feeling. They could not completely destroy the connection if something real existed beneath the confusion. And now those memories are returning. A look, a conversation, a moment when you helped them, a time when you understood them without needing an explanation. Small things they once dismissed are suddenly becoming important. Because when the false story begins to collapse, the truth often returns through the smallest details. Your soulmate may be asking themselves why someone worked so hard to convince them that you were a problem. Why were they so invested in keeping you apart? Why did they always appear whenever your connection became stronger? Why did every path leading back to you somehow end with another warning? And the more they ask, the more uncomfortable the answers become. Because now your soulmate is not only questioning the manipulator. They are questioning their own choices. They are wondering whether they allowed someone else to make decisions about a connection that belonged to them. They may feel regret. They may feel anger. They may even feel embarrassed that they trusted the wrong person. But beneath all of that is something much deeper, recognition. They are beginning to understand that the person they were told to fear may have been the person who was quietly waiting for them to see the truth. And now the false image is breaking. The version of you created by someone else's words is disappearing. What remains is the real question your soulmate can no longer avoid. Now that they finally know who was standing between you, what are they going to do about the connection they almost lost because of someone else's story? And now the truth has reached the point where it can no longer be hidden. Your soulmate may not know exactly what to say yet, but something inside them has changed permanently. The person who once controlled the story no longer has the same power, because your soulmate is no longer accepting every explanation without question. Every conversation now carries a second layer. Every warning is examined. Every excuse is compared with what actually happened. And the person who once spoke with confidence may suddenly become nervous, defensive, or strangely quiet. They may say, "You misunderstood me." They may say, "I was only trying to protect you." They may say, "I never meant for things to go this far." But your soulmate is listening differently now. Because once someone discovers they were manipulated, every old conversation becomes evidence. The words that once sounded caring may now sound calculated. The concern may now look like control. The warnings may now look like jealousy. And the person who believed they could keep you separated may finally realize that the story they built is collapsing from the inside. Imagine someone building a wall brick by brick between two people, believing neither side will ever notice. One brick is a rumor. Another is a half-truth. Another is a carefully timed warning. Another is a memory twisted just enough to change its meaning. Then one day one brick falls. Then another. Suddenly, both people can see the wall. And once you can see the wall, you can finally ask who built it. That is where your soulmate may be now. They may be looking back at everything and realizing that the distance between you was not as natural as they once believed. Maybe they are thinking about reaching out. Maybe they are watching you quietly. Maybe they are trying to understand whether you would even listen if they came back. And perhaps they are afraid, because they know that discovering the truth does not automatically erase the pain they caused you. They may wonder whether you still trust them. They may wonder whether you hate them. They may wonder if too much time has passed. But here is what you need to understand. You are not required to chase them into an explanation. You are not required to prove your heart to someone who was once convinced by another person's version of you. You are not required to beg them to believe what they should have asked you directly. The truth is moving now without you having to force it. And that is the part that makes this moment so powerful. You spent so long being misunderstood that you may have started believing you would always have to defend yourself. But the truth does not always need a courtroom. Sometimes it simply needs enough time for the lies to contradict themselves. A lie can control a conversation, but it cannot control reality forever. Your soulmate is now standing at a crossroads. They can continue protecting the person who manipulated them, or they can accept what they now know. They can pretend nothing happened, or they can finally acknowledge that someone influenced the way they saw you. They can remain comfortable inside the old story, or they can face the uncomfortable truth that they may have pushed away someone they never truly understood. And if they return, the return will not be about pretending the past never happened. It will require honesty. It will require accountability. It will require them to look at you and admit that they allowed another voice to become louder than their own experience of you. But whether they come back or not, one thing has already changed. The false version of you no longer controls the story. The person who tried to define you has lost the power to do so. Your soulmate knows there was more happening behind the scenes than they were told. They know someone had influence. They know the connection was affected by information that was never complete. And now they have to live with the truth. You were not suddenly transformed into the person they should have seen all along. They simply stopped looking at you through someone else's eyes. The person who manipulated their opinion may have controlled the story for a season. They may have created distance. They may have caused doubt. They may have convinced your soulmate to question what was real. But they could not control what happens when truth becomes stronger than the lie. And now your soulmate knows. They know who influenced them. They know what was hidden. They know what was lost while they believed someone else's version of you. The question is no longer whether they will ever see you clearly. They already do. The question is what they will do now that they finally understand who was standing between you all along.